Hey, Garage Gym athletes, before we get started, I wanted to let you know we are upping our Instagram game so we can better educate the industry. The goal is to drown out the influencers in bro science that is social media. If you want to help, screenshot this podcast episode and tag us at Garage Gym Athlete and a friend in your Instagram stories. We'd love to connect, and we will even be sending some free merch to a select few who actually take us up on this 15-second task. So go get it done, and I look forward to connecting with you. All right, now to the show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Garage Gym Athlete Podcast. Jerred Moon here with Joe Courtney. What's up, Joe?
How's it going, man?
It's going pretty well. Finally getting back to a question. We've just been kind of doing other episodes lately, but this one's about Vo2 Max from Matt. He asked in Team Builder, kind of in the community app, community section of our app. So he says, question for the podcast, is Vo2 Max, as measured by a wearable, impacted by weather? He said, I might just be getting worn down, but I noticed that my Vo2 Max via the Apple Watch has been decreasing from a high level in April/May starting in June. So, one, how much should you care about these Vo2 Max ratings from wearables? 2, does weather actually affect this? And 3, how can we make it better? So, 1, should you care that much? Ultimately, I'm going to say no. I mean, do you care what the your Vo2 Max is in your Garmin app or your Apple Watch or anything like that?
No, I've pretty much stopped paying attention to it. I used to see it all the time a couple of years ago when I was running, especially funny enough, when I was wearing the Apple Watch. Garmin, not so much. I see it come up and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. It's 51. Yeah, whatever. But it's such a long-term type of stat that sure, it's nice to get it better, but it doesn't really affect my performance day to day. It doesn't affect my recovery. It doesn't affect any of these things. It's just one of those that is interesting, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't know. I was paying attention to those things, especially when I was doing a lot more running. But then I noticed, Garmin specifically does this thing where it'll give you like a performance number. I forget how far. You're
Yeah.
about a mile into your run, and it'll say your performance conditions
Plus
for
whatever.
today. Yeah, and I've noticed that, if I could be running downhill for my run to start. And that's actually kind of how it works in my neighborhood. When I leave my neighborhood, if I go right, I'm going at a slight downhill for literally a mile. And if I go the other direction, it's a little bit of both. It's up and down. It's harder if I go left. And I've noticed it give me different performance conditions, thus different Vo2 maxes based on the different direction that I go. So this is just anecdotal, but I already feel like a little bit flawed, right? Because if it's like Monday, I ran right downhill and it's like, oh, your performance condition is amazing. And then I run left, which is more of an ascent. It's like, oh, your condition sucks. Like maybe you should work out more. And it's just like, well, how accurate are those things anyway?
Yeah. I think for that one, it's purely tied to pace and speed because when I do my zone 2 runs, I get like a +2 performance rating. I think it goes to 1 to 10 or 1 to 8 or 9 or something like that. But if I do intervals, it might be +5 or 6. But I'm running fast and then I stop for a couple of minutes and then that's all I'm doing. But it gives me a much higher performance based on that. And then same thing. Typically my route, I have to go uphill a little bit, but then it's mostly downhill for the next mile or so, just gradual. It's kind of the same situation.
Now, going on to, does the weather affect your Vo2 max? I tried pulling up some data about specifically to wearables and Vo2 max. Not so much does weather affect Vo2 max, but does wearable reporting Vo2 max change in weather? You can find some stuff, but it's not concrete because it's going to be really hard to get Apple Watch or Garmin or Whoop, or I guess Whoop probably doesn't even do Vo2 max, or they didn't last time I was using that. But it's going to be really hard to get them to admit that there's an inaccuracy or flaw in their calculations, right? Because they have these studies that back them up. They say they're accurate. All their studies are typically done side by side, kind of gold standard. So I would wear the Apple Watch or the Garmin on a treadmill wearing the mask, having my blood lactate threshold tested, so that way they can see, hey, the watch is reporting this, and we are by gold standard reporting this. How close are they? And then they're within certain parameters. So that's how they normally test these things. They don't generally test them in the middle of a Texas summer running outside, or the middle of a Minnesota winter, running outside, something like that. They're not typically perfectly geared for those situations. And I would say any extreme temperature is going to affect your overall VO2 max from a wearable, just because your body is under more stress. And we've talked about this with hyperthermic conditioning, training, and heat. Like, I go outside in my garage in Texas summer and train, and I'm at 100 calories in the warm up. I'm at 120 calories in the warm up. And my body's having to put out a lot more effort just to keep me cool. And they might want to pretend like they can see through all those things, but I don't think that they actually can. So I would say that any decrease you're seeing in your VO2 max from um, your wearable isn't an actual decrease, but your wearable might not be wrong, is the point I want to bring up. Because I could, this was a big thing I tracked when I was doing the Murph project. So I would track Murph times, when I'm doing it every single week for a year. I did this for multiple different years, and my Murph time would go up, 20% or 15%. It'd be 15% slower, 20% slower in the dead of summer. And so if a wearable is looking at the same thing and they're trying to calculate it via GPS, via pace, via your heart rate, via all these things over a distance, well, if you can't actually run, let's say a mile, or go 20 minutes, which is kind of some of the thresholds for these things, that you can't do 20 minutes of activity without your heart rate getting super escalated, which means you're going to be able to perform less power output no matter what the activity is. The watch is going to obviously at that point report that you're in worse shape, or your VO2 max is not as good, right? Like, that's how it's going to work. So I normally ignore almost all performance metrics in the summer. So I'm not looking at VO2 max. I'm not looking at previous times. Like, I don't care about my mile times. I don't care about cycling times. I don't care about any sort of mixed modal times. I throw all that out the window because I know the stressor of the heat is adding to my ability to put work out. And so I'm not going to be data wise as fit, even though you're trying just as hard. You're putting out high heart rate activities, all these things. You're getting fitter. And that's the biggest thing that you need to know about summer training, is you are getting fitter. It's hyperthermic conditioning. When you cool off, when things cool down, and you've pushed yourself to that level during those extreme heat and extreme temperatures, you walk out on the other side fitter. You just do. And so that's one thing that you need to take into account, and not be so concerned about it.
Yeah, I think it's also why heart rate is, and like zones and stuff, is kind of one of the more immediate things that I like to pay attention to. And if you're just concentrated on the intent, the effort, and the right heart rate, like with our zone 2 runs, then over time things will get better. But it's not just trying to manipulate a bigger, longer like stat in every training session. It's just focusing on, it's more of taking it one at a time, focusing on just your own session at that point. Because even though like Garmin's does that, has heat acclimation now, and they'll give you like a heat acclimation score after the workout, but that's not applied. I don't think that's applied to the VO2 max either. So I only pretty much just pay attention to heart rate, pace. Like, if I know what my pace, somewhat what my pace should be to keep my heart rate at a certain level, and how I can manipulate that. And then like when hills come, because it's probably also like you mentioned, it's not really accounting for hills or elevation. That's kind of a big deal when you're running. So yeah, especially in the summer, and training in general, heart rate and intent are kind of the more important things to really kind of focus on.
Yeah, and I was reading one of like the white papers published by Apple, and I think if the grade is too much, they might throw your score out. Like, if it's a heavy ascent, then they will like factor that in, but if it's within their like standard deviation, they won't, which everyone knows who's run any distance, any kind of hill can suck, right? It doesn't need to be
Yeah.
like straight uphill. Now, the last thing I want to hit on is like what to do about it, and how I think you should look at these things, because I don't actually want to tell you ignore all data and metrics. They don't matter. That's not really what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is you need to set your parameters for testing. And I think this is what your ultimate takeaway should be. So if wherever you live, like for me in Texas, it would be pretty late in the year. So I'm talking November, December, maybe even, beginning of the year into early spring, something like that, is when weather is just going to be great for Texans and not overly hot. We don't really get overly cold, and if we do, it's not for very long. So that's when I might start paying attention to things. And so under ideal conditions, because there is some research out there that's saying around 68 degrees is like a great temperature for um, testing your VO2 max. It's like just there you really don't have a lot of limitations at that point. Like 68 degrees is great. I would argue I could go much cooler than that, and I feel like I perform better. But that's what you need to be looking for. So when are some ideal temperatures? And again, VO2 max is something that you don't need to be looking at on a weekly basis because it takes a lot of time to actually change your VO2 max. So I would ignore it except for like this once a year test. Like maybe your birthday's in March and you want to test every year on your birthday. Like we test these the Garage Gym Athlete team, we talk about Fit Week. Most of us don't do a full test of every single metric that we test every quarter. We provide that opportunity for our athletes, but we don't test every single metric every quarter. But I test every single metric at least once per year. And I do that under the conditions I'm talking about. So I will do that typically when the weather is pretty good. And I'll kind of line that up. I'll be like, you know what? This is going to be a good fit week for me to test everything. It's not overly hot. It's not overly cold. So I know it's not going to destroy my aerobic metrics or anything like that. So that would be my recommendation, is setting a once a year time frame based off of your location and weather, and then be like, okay, this is kind of my gold standard for when I take a look at my VO2 max, when I time my mile, when I time my E3 5K, when I time all these metrics, and then look at it year to year. So increase the amount of time in between metric testing that you're looking at, and pay more attention to year over year as opposed to month over month or anything like that, especially season to season.
Yeah.
Anything else on that?
Different ways. No, just different ways to think about it and training, and just how just sometimes it can be hard for people to wrap their head around new things, especially like all these wearables. There are all these metrics and all this data, and like to a certain extent that they're wanting to give you as much as you want, and some things are good to pay attention to, and they provide so many things to so many different athletes because so many different types of athletes use these, but not everything's going to pertain to you or be that all that important. And I think this is just something that we've learned over 10 years of having these, because we started Whoop about 10 years ago, and then or Apple even before that. It was like Apple, then Whoop, and then just rabbit hole after and so on. So just adjusting to what metrics to kind of pay attention to, and what are important to you.
Yeah, there are a lot of other ways to tell if you're getting better in benchmarks. And if you are going to benchmark on a more frequent basis, benchmark within a cycle within the same time domain. So like, here's my mile time in the middle of July, and then I test it again at the beginning of August. So it's not too different, as opposed to my mile time in the spring and my mile time in the middle of summer. It'd be very different. But yeah, that's it for this one, guys. Let us know your wearable thoughts, either in the comments or, in our community. We'd love to see those come out, because, we want to know what you guys have questions on about wearables. We have a lot of experience using different wearables, and we've bounced around. Like we don't have like one that we love the most. We both wear a Garmin, but that doesn't mean, we're pro Garmin. We have no sponsors. We didn't get the watches for free, anything like that. We just have kind of landed on those being the most useful for us. But, whatever you guys have, we'll look into for future Q&As. But that's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching or listening. Thanks for listening to the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. If you want to learn more, go to garagegymathlete.com. You can learn about our training. Let us send you a copy of our book, The Garage Gym Athlete, or you can even get featured on the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. Thanks for listening.